Welcome everybody to How to Brew with Brewer's Best. I'm Sean, and today we're going to walk you through step by step how to make beer at home with a Brewer's Best ingredient kit. Let's dig in. All right. Today we're going to take a look at the Pacific Coast IPA. It's one of my favorite recipes. So let's take a look and see what we got inside. Instructions, some postcards, caps, muslin bag, got our priming sugar, some crushed grains. This is Carapils malt. Helps with head retention and mouthfeel. We got some crushed Cara brown and crushed biscuit. Gives a little bit of color and flavor to the beer. Apex yeast. Two cans of light extract. This is where most of our sugar is going to come from. That creates our ABV or alcohol content. Along with some corn sugar. And the best part of all the hops. Got Chinook, Columbus, some Cashmere, and some Centennial. Okay, so now that we've familiarized ourselves with all the ingredients in the kit, let's take a look at the instructions. I see the first step here is to read all the recommended procedures before we begin. That's a great step. It'll help you get to know the brew day, see the flow of the instructions. That way you know what's coming up next. So let's take a look. Now that we've read over all the instructions, the next step is to clean and sanitize. You want to clean and sanitize all your brewing equipment. We've already cleaned all of our brewing equipment. We used PBW here to clean. It's powdered brewery wash. You can also use products like Easy Clean or One Step. For sanitizing, today we're going to use Star San. I've already got my solution mixed up here. Make sure you dilute it to the manufacturer's recommendations. I like to mix it up ahead of time to put all my equipment in there. That way the fermenter's already sanitized, all my equipment's always sanitized, and it's ready to go for whenever I'm done with the brew. If you'd like, you can also use iodophor. Both iodophor and Star San do an equally great job of sanitizing your brewing equipment. Both are certified sanitizers, so it's just a matter of preference on which one you want to use. Just make sure you're diluting them down to the manufacturer's recommendation. Let's get our equipment in the sanitizer solution. My strainer. Spoon, hydrometer. We'll need that later on for our gravity readings. And that's it. We'll let that stuff set, and let's take a look at the next step here. All right. Next step is to steep the grains. So we're going to pour 2.5 gallons of clean water into our brew pot here, and then we're going to heat that up. We're going to fill our brew pot up with some water here. You see, I'm using bottled water. I like to use bottled spring water and recommend using spring water or distilled water, especially if you're not sure about your tap water at home. If the water tastes funny, that's going to come through in your beer, and you definitely don't want that. Well water sometimes can be kind of iffy. So I just recommend using some bottled spring water. It has all the minerals in there to help the yeast and help the beer turn out correctly. All right, so now that we've got our brew pot full of water here, we're going to go ahead and light our burner. We are using the element burner here today in the Brewer's Beast pot. Just so you know, you don't necessarily have to have this equipment. If you've got a kettle large enough at home that you can boil 2.5 gallons of water in and a gas stove, you can also do all of this inside. Like I said, today we're going to use the element burner in the Brewer's Beast kettle. Now that we got our burner lit, We're going to let our water heat up while we're getting our crushed grains ready to put in there. We're going to let our water temperature come up to between 150 and 165. That's going to be the optimal steeping temperature. Once we get up to there, we'll cut our flame and hold, and then we'll get our grains in there. But let's get our grains ready. Now that our water's heating up, we're going to go ahead and grab our muslin bag here. And this is what we're going to use to steep our grains in. This particular kit did come with 2 bags of grain. We just want to put them all in the muslin bag. Depending on what kit you have, it may have 1 bag of specialty grains or it may have 2 bags of specialty grains, but they're all going to go in the same steeping bag. So let's get those in there. All right, now that we got all of our grains in the muslin bag here, you just want them nice and loose in there. You don't want it real compact and tight. And then what I like to do here is I just like to make a small little knot here at the top of the bag, just so nothing falls out if the whole bag does happen to slip into the brew pot. And again, nice and loose, nothing restricting. And I think we're ready to go ahead and add this into the water here once it gets up to temperature. Now that our water's up to temperature, we're going to go ahead and add our grains that we prepared a little bit ago. And you just want to dunk these in there kind of like a tea bag. And then I like to take the spoon and just kind of mix them around a little bit. This allows all the grains to get wet because you don't want just the outside of the grains to get wet and the center to stay dry. We want all the grain in the bag to go ahead and get contact with the water. So just mix it around a little bit. Now once you feel that you've got it mixed up well, we'll just leave this set for 20 minutes. So our grains are going to steep for a total of 20 minutes. What I do is while they're steeping in there so they don't fall in there, I just give it a little tie off on the handle of my brew kettle there. And then I'm going to grab my cell phone and use my stopwatch on my cell phone just to keep track of my time. Our 20 minutes is up, so that means we're done steeping our grains. We're going to go ahead and pull these guys out. You just want to kind of let them drain out. You see all that color that's coming out of there still and all the water. You want to make sure all that gets back into the brew pot. What I like to have is a double mesh strainer here, and I'll just set that right over the brew pot and then let my grains just kind of drain out for a little bit. I also like to take a little bit of water and give them a little bit of rinse. Again, we're just trying to get as much flavor and as much color out of these as we can. Don't have to go crazy with the rinse. And we'll just let that sit and drain for just a moment. All right, now that our grains are all done draining out here, we're just going to go ahead and discard them. You can take the grains and make dog treats. Check out our video on that. You can also make pretzels. If you have livestock at home, you can also feed the grains to your livestock. It is still nutritious for them. We just simply steeped out the sugars in the color here. But for us today, we're just going to discard them. All right, now that we've discarded our grains, let's take a look and see what we got in the brew pot here. As you can see, our water is now warped. And I'll just get a spoonful here to show you what it looks like. Got a good color here. All that came from the grains that we just steeped. So we're just going to let that come to a boil. Once that comes to a boil, we're going to go ahead and start adding some of our extracts and get into the brew day schedule. Now that everything's boiling in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn down the heat just a little bit because it has a tendency to want to rise. We don't want to boil over. And as I add these other ingredients, especially the liquid malt extract, it will help so that that doesn't scorch on the bottom. You definitely don't want to scorch any of your liquid malt extracts on the bottom. So we're just going to turn down the heat just a little bit here to help mitigate that down. Give it another stir. All right. As you're pouring your extract in, you want to make sure that you're constantly stirring. Again, we do not want to scorch any of this to the bottom of our brew pot because that's just going to make the beer taste off, and we definitely don't want off tasting beer. Just make sure you keep stirring. Make sure you scrape the cans out real good too. Again, you want it, this is what's going to create most of your alcohol. These are all fermentable sugars, so you want to get as much out of this can as you possibly can. Once I've scraped out what I can, what I like to do is just put a couple spoonfuls of the hot wort in there, and I'll set the can aside. And what that's going to do is that's going to let the rest of the malt extract that's still sticking to the sides in there seep down and mix in with the water, and I'll be able to dump the rest of it from the can in there. Again, we want to get all the sugars out of here that we can. More sugar means more alcohol. Move on to the second can. And we'll just repeat that process. All right. With this particular kit, we also got a pound of corn sugar that goes in with the liquid malt extracts. So we'll go ahead and get that in right now. No method to the madness here. With the corn sugar, just dump it in. The rest of our liquid malt extract's ready to add in there, so we're going to go ahead and dump that in now. And we'll just set these aside. All right, we'll let that come back to a boil. All right, as we're waiting for this to come back to a boil here, I'm going to take another look over the instructions here, and the next step is going to be follow the brew day schedule for our hop additions. Brew day schedule is on the lower right-hand side of the instructions. The brew day schedule is what's going to keep you on track with your brew. You'll see the hop addition breakdowns within the brew day schedule. Total brew time is going to be 60 minutes. I like to use my smartphone clock to keep me on time. So you can either count up to 60 minutes or you count down to 60 minutes. You just want to make sure that you stay on track with your hop additions because that's going to affect the bitterness of the beer and the overall flavor. Now we're ready to add our hops. Our first hop addition is the Columbus hops. And we'll just give it a light stir while we add those in there. And these guys are going to stay in here. Once you add the hops, you don't ever want to take any of the hops back out. You just dump them in and they stay in for the duration of the boil. Oh, that's a great aroma. All right, now that our first hop addition's in there, we're going to go set our timer. That way we can keep track of where we're at in our boil. Now the 40 minutes has passed by. We're ready to add our second hop addition. This is going to be for some flavor and aroma, and we're going to use Centennial hops here that came in the kit. And again, we'll just slowly sprinkle them in and just stir the wort as we're adding them. All right, give it a good stir, make sure everything's good and mixed up. And again, we don't remove hops once we add them into the boil. They'll just stay in there for the duration. We'll take a look at the brew day schedule here again real quick and see when our next hop addition's coming up. All right, looks like only 5 minutes till our next hop addition. And it's going to be another pack of Centennial. So our 5 minutes is up. We're going to add our second ounce of Centennial hops here. Just give that a good stir in there. And once again, these hops are going to stay in for the duration of the boil, so there's no need to try to worry about getting them back out of there. All right, looks like another 5 minutes before our next addition here. So I'm going to set my timer.
All right, good to go.
All right, our 5 minutes has passed and we're ready to add our last hop addition, which is going to be cashmere hops. We'll go ahead and sprinkle those in. Give it a good stir. Then after this, we're going to let it boil for 10 more minutes. We're going to kill the flame, and then it's time to cool our wort. Now, I did notice that I do have an extra pack of hops left over, but after reading through the recommended procedures, I see that we have a dry hopping stage coming up when we transfer over to secondary. So we'll just set those hops aside for now when we need them later on. Our final 10-minute boil is up, and we're going to go ahead and kill the flame on this guy and proceed over to the cooling. All right, so we're going to use a wort chiller here today to chill our wort down. Again, this is not a piece of equipment that you have to be able to brew beer at home. You can also fill up a utility sink with ice and water and soak your brew pot in there, and that'll also help cool it down. We just want to get it in there, and we want to help the wort chill down as fast as we possibly can. We want to come down to about 80 degrees because we are going to have some cool fresh water to top up with. So we don't want to get too low down to 70 or anything like that, because once we add our other cool water, then we'll be below our fermentation temperature. So we're going to go ahead and get the water kicked on here and get to cooling. As your wort's cooling down, it's all right to give it a couple stirs every once in a while just to mix it up. That'll help it cool down faster. We're also going to add in some water. We're going to go ahead and pour that in now. Again, this is just to help the process speed up a little bit. And again, the target temperature we're looking here is 80 degrees. All right, we're down to 80 degrees. We'll go ahead and pull our wort chiller out, set it aside. We're using a double mesh strainer here. You want to transfer as little as the sediment as possible over into the primary fermenter. So you can either use a double mesh strainer to strain out the solids, or you can use a siphon or a racking cane and siphon your beer over into the primary fermenter. But the goal is just to transfer as little trub as possible. All right, you ready? Set that aside and just take our spoon and stir it up here a little bit. That'll help get rid of some of let that liquid get down in there. Good enough. Then we'll just give her a little shake like this. And that's it. That's what we're trying to avoid getting into the fermenting bucket. As much of that as you can avoid putting in there, the better. So spent hops are very poisonous to dogs. They have fatal results if they do eat the hops. So make sure that you put this in a bag and immediately into your outdoor trash can, somewhere where your pets can't get to it at all. All right, so now that we got our wort transferred over into our primary fermenter, we're going to go ahead and top up to the 5-gallon mark. I'm going to use the graduated markings on the side of my fermenter here. Depending on your lighting, sometimes it can be hard to see where the level of the wort actually is. I've got some good lighting here. I can see right through. So we're going to go ahead and add our fresh water here. Again, we're using bottled water, bottled spring water. And there we are at 5 gallons. Next, we're going to go ahead and give it a good stir, and that's going to aerate the wort. So it's going to introduce some oxygen into the wort, which is good for the beginning of fermentation because it's going to help the yeast and make sure that your beer ferments out very well and you have a low lag time before fermentation starts. So you want to just, don't be afraid to go ahead and give it a good stir, whip it up real nice before you pitch your yeast. Another reason you want to stir it up really good too is because we're going to take a gravity reading before we pitch our yeast to make sure we hit our target original gravity. And when you add your top-up water can sit on top of the concentrated wort because the wort has a heavier gravity than the water. And so it could cause a low gravity reading for your first one. So you just want to make sure that you're mixing up your wort real well. And again, in the process, you're aerating the wort, which is great for the yeast. And I think that's a good stir. So we're going to grab our hydrometer here and get ready to take a gravity reading. It is a little tough here with it all foamy like that, but we'll just kind of pull the foam to the side with our spoon and take our gravity reading. First things first, of course, we want to take our hydrometer and give it a little dunk in our sanitizer just to make sure, again, we don't want infected beer. We'll just clear out a little spot. Give our hydrometer in there. And then we'll just give her a little spin. All right, so our original gravity target was 1055. We are right at 1055. It's a little tough to see in there, but if you get down in there close enough, you can see that we're at 1055. So we're right on the money as far as our gravity goes. Fermentation is not time specific. We pitch the yeast in there. Yeast is a living organism, and it's going to work at different paces depending on the environment that it's stored in. So make sure you learn how to read your hydrometer. All professional breweries use hydrometer readings to tell when their beer is finished. We have a great video on it, so make sure you check that out. All right, so the last step here before we put the lid on this thing is we're going to pitch our yeast. This one did come with an Apex Culture San Diego strain, which is perfect for IPAs. I'm going to go ahead and tear that open and get it dumped in. We don't need to rehydrate the yeast or do a yeast starter with this dry yeast. It will perform just perfectly, just dumping it right in the wort. We'll give it a quick stir and then we'll put our lid on and brew day is done. No method to the madness. You can just give it a dump because we're going to give it a little stir anyways. There we go, guys. We're just going to put the lid back on the fermenter now, put our airlock in place, and we're good to go. All right, let's get our lid on here. Again, we had our lid soaking in the sanitizer solution. That way it's completely sanitized, and we'll just snap it in place here. Lids do fit kind of tight, so you do got to put a little bit of force in it, but they'll snap right on. And we have our airlock here. This guy will fit right in the grommeted hole here. And there is a little line, fill line. You want to make sure that you're filled up to that fill line. And you want to make sure you use some sanitized water. Again, we just took some right out of our bucket and put that in there. You don't really want to use regular water because it could potentially infect it. So we want to make sure there's sanitizer in there to kill off any wild yeast or bacteria that might happen to transfer into there for some odd reason. Just push that guy right down in the hole. You don't want to put too much force in. It doesn't need to fit all the way down into the grommet. You'll see it just sticks out a little bit, just enough in there to where you feel it's sealed. All right, so one of the final stages here is we're going to go ahead and get ready to take our fermenter to the room where we're going to store it until we're ready to transfer it over to secondary. And a couple of key points here for fermentation. You want to make sure that you're storing your fermenter up off the floor. We don't want it really on any concrete floors or anything like that. Concrete can draw up to 5 degrees out of the fermenter. So although ambient room temperature might be 70 degrees, if it's on concrete, your fermenter temperature might be actually 65 degrees. It just depends, especially if you live in an area where the climate changes a lot. You know, you have different seasons. You want to put it in a place in the house that is the most temperature stable. Again, yeast is a living organism, so it really enjoys stability. Temperature swing of plus or minus 5 degrees could cause the yeast to stall out and not fully ferment your beer, and that's not what we wanted to have happen. So make sure you're picking the spot in your house that's most temperature stable. Ideal temperatures are going to be anywhere between 68 and 70 degrees. That is a broad range. But as long as it stays stable within that range, you're good to go. A swing of 1 or 2 degrees is just fine, but when you start hitting that 5 mark, that's where you want to make sure that, you know, maybe you wrap the fermenter in a towel to help keep it temperature stable. But stability is the key. All right, so utility room here in my house is the most temperature stable area. So we're just going to put it up here on the shelf, and we're just going to let it set for about 5 to 7 days. We'll come back, we'll take another gravity reading before we move over to secondary fermentation. And as long as we're in the right range, we'll go ahead and transfer over when that time comes. Here we are 5 days later, so we're ready to go ahead and transfer over to secondary, check our gravity, and get our dry hopping going on. So we're going to go ahead and pull the lid off this guy here, pull our airlock out, set it aside. We can definitely tell some fermentation's been going on. We got a nice Kreuzen ring in here. Everything looks nice and frothy, so we'll go ahead and grab our thief. We'll take a gravity reading just to see where we're at. It's okay if there's still a little bit of fermentation going on at this point in time, because we're going to transfer over to our secondary fermenter where it's going to finish out, and we'll also add our dry hops in there. Make sure that you sanitize anything that's going to come into contact with your beer, because you definitely don't want an infection. All right, so I'm going to use a thief here to draw out a small sample. If you got a baster or anything like that, you can use that. Just anything to draw out a sample so that you can take your gravity reading and see where you're at. Like I had mentioned earlier, if there's still a little bit of fermentation left to go, that is just fine, because we're just transferring over to secondary and going to do our dry hopping. And you just need enough in there just to be able to take a gravity reading with. That's a beautiful color. We'll get just a little bit more. All right, that should be plenty to go ahead and take our hydrometer reading in there. As long as your hydrometer floats in there, it should be just fine. If it bottoms out, then you're going to want to put a little bit more in there so that you can get an accurate reading. Again, I got my hydrometer back here in my sanitation solution. And we'll go ahead and drop that guy in. And we're going to have to add a little bit more. Thought we had enough. Just definitely want to make sure your hydrometer's floating in there. There we go. Now we're not bottoming out anymore. Actually, we'll just discard that. Give it a little spin here so I can see where we're at. All right, so our gravity's at 1017. We still got just a little bit to go. We're gonna get ready to transfer this over to our secondary fermenter and get our dry hopping going on. So let's get started. All right, so now that we've confirmed that our gravity's in the right spot, we're gonna go ahead and get ready to transfer from our primary to our secondary. This is a gravity feed, so you see I got the secondary fermenter sitting down here on the floor, and my primary with the beer right up here. We got our siphon down here soaking in our sanitizer. Just give it a couple pumps just to make sure we pump some sanitizer through it before we get started here. You can use a siphon or you can use a racking cane, whatever tools that you have available to you. All right, that should do it for getting a couple good pumps of sanitizer through there. And don't be afraid to make a mess, because it's really hard not to make a mess during this part. Got our tubing down in there. Whether you're using a racking cane or a siphon, just want to make sure you don't quite go all the way to the bottom just yet, because you don't want to soak up any sediment down there. And just give this a couple pumps and let it get started. And we'll just let the siphon do the work from here. All right, our transition to secondary fermentation is complete. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to add our dry hopping. So for the dry hops, you can either dump them straight into the fermenter, but what I like to do is get an extra little muslin bag, and I've just put them in the muslin bag. It makes it so it doesn't make a sludgy mess in the secondary fermenter. So we'll just take these guys and dump them right in there. Just grab the end of this and we'll just tie a little knot in there so that they don't fall out. And then you just want to work them right down into the neck of the carboy. And we'll just leave them set in there. Take our bung. We'll put that guy right there on the top of the carboy. Grab our airlock. Refix the airlock, and then we'll go ahead and store this back in our fermentation area. And we'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll be ready to bottle. All right, so we're back here on bottling day. We're getting ready to make our priming sugar solution. We went ahead and boiled up 2 cups of water, so I'm going to add the priming sugar in and mix that up. Priming sugar is going to give the yeast some sugar to eat and create the carbonation while the beer sits in the bottles. And we'll just stir that up real good. We'll just let that set for a second and cool down. In the meantime, we did take our gravity reading, final gravity. We're at 1013, so we're right where we need to be. Perfect time to bottle. All right, now that our priming sugar is all cooled down, we're going to go ahead and dump that into our bottling bucket. All right, next we're going to go ahead and transfer our beer from the secondary fermenter over into the bottling bucket. That way we can start proceeding to bottling. All right, now that we got everything transferred over into the bottling bucket, we're going to go ahead and just give it a nice gentle stir. You don't want to stir vigorously because we don't want to oxidize the beer. So it's a nice gentle stir just to fully mix in the priming sugar. All right, that ought to do it. Next step is going to be we're going to sanitize up some bottles so that we can come back and get to bottling. Okay, so to sanitize the bottles, what we've done is we filled up the sink here full of Star San solution. And we're just going to let them soak in there. You want to let them soak for about a minute. They need about a minute of contact time to fully sanitize. You just dunk them in, let them fill up with the sanitizer solution. and just let them set. Once that minute's up, we'll just empty them out and just set them off to the side, let them air dry. Once they're pretty much dry, we can proceed to bottling. All right, now that our bottles are all sanitized up, we're ready to start filling some of them. Also have our caps over here soaking in some sanitizer solution, so that way they're all sanitized and ready to go. For the bottling setup, there's a couple different ways that you can set this up. Some people prefer to have a long piece of hose with the bottle filler attached to the end so they can freely move it around and fill their bottles. I prefer to snip a little piece of the hose off of here and attach it to the filler and just affix it right here to the spigot. That way, if I have to step away for any reason, I don't have to worry about a clean spot to set my bottle filler down. I can just walk away and do what I need to do and come back. So with that, let's go ahead and fill up some bottles. All right, so to fill your beer bottle, all you do is insert your bottle filler here. It's got a little nozzle here at the end that if you press on it, it'll start letting the beer flow out. So all you want to do is put your bottle on here and just press that all the way against the bottom of the bottle, and you'll see the beer start to flow out of there. You can maybe see it filling up there. Let that fill up to about right there, and you bring it down here and just give it a little tilt. You can get the last little bit in there. You want to fill it up to just about an inch from the top of the bottle. All right, once your bottle's filled up to the appropriate level, you're ready to start capping. You want to take a cap out of your sanitizer solution. And we're going to use a twin lever capper here. It's got a little magnet on the bottom of it here. You just place your cap right on there. Bring it over to your bottle. Put it right over top here. You want to let the capper do the work. It doesn't take a lot of force to do this. You'll feel it snap into place. And then you're all set. Your bottle's capped. All right, so you just want to repeat that process until you've gotten all the beer out of your bottling bucket. Once you have all your bottles squared away, you want to store them in a nice warm area in the house. This is just like fermentation. It is a mini fermentation in the bottle, and it is very temperature sensitive. It takes about 2 weeks to start having carbonation form in the bottles. However, it can take a little bit longer than that if the temperature that you have your bottle stored in is a little bit on the cooler side, so be patient. Really hope you found this video informative. I'm going to get to cleaning this mess up. Happy homebrewing out there. Cheers.